Gaius squinted into the heat haze, where stone vanished to horizon. The Via Appia, finished only 16 years before his birth in 312 BCE, now stretched before him in a pale line. Each slab was set so closely that cart wheels whispered rather than clattered. An ox cart creaked by, its driver nodding with the habitual confidence of those who trusted the road, not the weather. Gaius paused at a crossroads marked by a small shrine. The air was thick with the scent of hot dust and lavender from a nearby farmstead. He had learned in the castra, the legion's camp, that these roads were more than stone and gravel. They were veins of the Republic, later the Empire. Legions marched in perfect files, counting their paces, each man knowing that the distance from Rome to Capua was fixed, 212 Roman miles, measured by men like himself. Rome's engineers first built for war, but merchants soon crowded behind the soldiers, their wagons stuffed with amphorae and textiles. Military necessity demanded roads wide enough for wagons and tough enough for the iron-shod march of thousands. Julius Caesar, in 58 BCE, wrote in his Commentarii de Bello Gallico of moving troops at astonishing speed, crediting these pathways. Viae militaris, the military road, speeds our course. Yet, at every milestone, olive growers unloaded their harvest and children played in the dust, turning conquest to routine. Even in their earliest instructions, engineers insisted on precision. They surveyed land with rods, string, and the groma, ensuring every via would run as straight as terrain allowed. What began as lifelines for armies soon became the arteries of everyday Roman life, and the steel threads binding the continent to its capital. Gaius once watched an old surveyor, a leathery-faced veteran named Lucullus, set up the groma at the start of a new route near Beneventum. Sun flashed on the device's cross-shaped arms. The tool's lines hung heavy with plumb bobs, forming a forest of straightness where men and mules bustled, hauling stakes and hemp rope. Lucullus moved with serene certainty, sighting along axial strings and barking instructions in clipped Latin. Each mark placed by the agrimensores was a command. Here, the empire will run straight. The land beneath the future road was no blank canvas. Wooded hills, marshes dotted with pale irises, and ancient burial mounds resisted imposition. Yet Lucullus and his team busied themselves from dawn to dusk, clearing undergrowth, staking their grid, and driving lime-dusted pegs to define the path's width. Roman standards demanded that each via be as direct as feasible. If the ground rose or fell, the road cut through. If a ravine split the route, stone arches would soon span the chasm. Once the line was settled, surveyors walked its length in careful strides. Each section was measured with the decimpeter, the 10-foot measuring rod, and checked again. Inscriptions scratched on wax tablets would become records in distant archives. Gaius remembered how, at the end of a long day, the future road shimmered only as a ribbon of disturbed earth, running arrow straight through copses and thickets. Stubbornly indifferent to terrain's ancient dictates, it was in these moments, as rough, wild landscapes transformed under their gaze, that the true Roman spirit of order revealed itself. What nature offered, the surveyors straightened. The empire's ambition could be mapped as a line, unwavering, cutting from city to conquest. A week after construction began, Gaius stood by the newly planted milestone, its marble face unmarred by time. The men called it a miliarium, Roman numerals carved deep, stating the distance from Rome's gilded pomerium. Every 1,000 paces, or roughly 1 Roman mile, another stone would appear, each silent witness to the expanse of empire. The effect was practical and psychological. Before Rome, travel meant uncertain reckonings. A footpath between Latium and Campania might vanish into thicket or reappear as a muddy track. Now, from forum to frontier, movement could be measured, charted, and discussed in evening reports. Gaius had heard an officer boast, "From Capua to Beneventum, 4 days by cart, less in good weather." It was not just pride, it was logistics. Grain shipments for Augustus's legions could be predicted with the accuracy of a merchant's ledger. One document from the decade after Augustus's death survives. A letter from a soldier at Mogontiacum, now Mainz, writing home that "it is 6 days from here to Augusta Trevororum by the milestones." The stone markers let even far-flung posts stay in step with Rome's heartbeat. The military advantage was obvious. During the campaigns of Germanicus around 15 CE, legions coordinated movements across hundreds of miles, knowing exactly the distance between camps at Vetera and Colonia, Claudia Ara Agrippinensium, now Cologne. Supplies moved, orders arrived, messages sped past in horse relay, all paced by those marble counters ticking off the empire's breadth. The stones, set deep, outlived their makers. But in their carved numerals, the scale of Roman ambition was rendered countable. Each mile another proof that the world could be measured, mapped, and mastered. Gaius walked beside the surveyors as they examined the line of new roadwork stretching from Beneventum toward the Apennines. To the casual eye, it was simply a stony scar across the hillside. But to the builders, it was the sum of centuries of craft. The road's strength lay far beneath its surface. First, they dug a trench, wide enough for 2 carts to pass, and deep enough that the earth was hard and dry. Into this, a foundation of heavy stones was set, sometimes more than a foot thick. On these rocks, a layer of crushed stone was poured, finer and sharper each time. Every builder in the crew knew the word statumen for the base, then rudus, then nucleus, each layer compacted in turn, each designed to spread weight and resist collapse. What astonished Gaius most were the ditches, cut to channel rain away from the road, so that it would not turn to mud in winter or dissolve into a swamp after storms. Sometimes ceramic pipes ran beneath the stones to drain water before it could rise. On steep hills, the surface was cambered, arched in the middle, so wheels found center and runoff did not linger. Even in the quiet hours, when the road looked deserted, its presence was enforced by the solidity underfoot. In some stretches outside Rome, earlier roads had already begun to sink or shift, their stones lost to time. But the Via Appia, rebuilt and widened in 312 BCE by Appius Claudius Caecus, taught a lesson. A road built well enough could carry not only the tramp of soldiers, but the centuries themselves. In the sound of Gaius's own sandals on the packed surface, the promise of unbroken movement echoed with every step. At dawn, the Via Flaminia thundered beneath marching feet. By midday, it bustled under a different traffic. Gaius remembered his early years, when the road's shoulders were crowded mostly by dust and disciplined sandals. Legions moved with strict rhythm. An army could advance nearly 20 Roman miles in good weather. Bridges and milestones had sprung up to serve their passage. But peace, as it spread, transformed everything. Now, mixed among soldiers, Gaius watched traders from Mediolanum trundle carts laden with olive oil and wine, and drovers herded cattle toward the markets in Rome. Maintenance once meant haste, filling potholes before a legion arrived, clearing debris so chariots could roll at full speed. But as decades passed, Gaius noticed gangs of road labourers mending the surface even in the quiet before festival days. The road no longer belonged to empire alone. It served those who bartered, who sold, who wished only to reach Rome one day faster than the last. The Via Appia revealed this shift in every rut and hoofprint. Originally cut as a highway for war by the time of the poet Horace, who joked about the bumpy ride to Brundisium in his satire from around 35 BCE, its inns catered as much to travelling merchants and notaries as to centurions. Inscriptions survive, carved by grateful traders who reached the end of their journey alive and wealthy. Rome's roads altered their character as empire grew. Where order had first been a matter of swords, commerce became the lifeblood, and stone relayed every ambition, whether martial or mercantile, into a common course. It was early twilight when Gaius watched a convoy roll north, mule-drawn wagons stacked high with amphorae, each stamped with the mark of the Annona, Rome's grain supply bureau. Each road was a blood vessel, pumping supplies out to barracks and posting stations, or sucking produce toward the hungry capital. An official manifest, found centuries later at Vindolanda near Hadrian's Wall, records sandals and tunics shipped from Gaul, destined for soldiers along the empire's bleakest edge. Every movement had its logic, traced in packed straw and cautious inventories. Along the major roads, Gaius knew of the cursus publicus, imperial relay stations run at state expense. Every few miles, a fresh team of horses stood ready to carry official letters. That meant word could travel from Rome to Viae in less than a day if urgency demanded. One wax tablet from the archives of a provincial governor reveals disbelief. A letter from Rome reached me in 4 days, as if the gods themselves bore it. The system was built for speed, for command, for the smooth respiration of power. Along the route, milestones gave way to way stations, each a hub for news, orders, or gossip over a quick meal and a change of animal. Gaius, passing one such post, saw not only soldiers but merchants and messengers drinking from the same trough. Roads, built for conquest, became vessels for every human need. Annona grain, personal letters, legal summons, papyrus scrolls of tax receipts bound for accountants in Alexandria. Their contents changed, but the rhythms of the road endured, stitching together the far corners of empire with things both momentous and mundane. Everywhere Gaius travelled, the road itself seemed to announce Roman presence before a single word was spoken. In the scrub outside Tarraco, local villagers looked up as his mule's footsteps echoed off flagstones, their world suddenly realigned on the axis of smooth basalt. The road was not just a path, but a statement, straight, broad, measured out by the Groma and levelled by the legion. It drew an uncompromising line through olive groves, across tribal boundaries, and over the remains of simpler, winding tracks. The Roman road ignored local logic. It was carved for discipline, not for the meandering of herds or the sway of an ox cart avoiding boulders. Near Capua, Gaius remembered asking an innkeeper about the older paths. The woman waved vaguely toward the hills. Goat tracks, muddy in winter, gone by spring, no milestones. The new road, meanwhile, was lined with those careful measures, granite posts chiselled with distance to Rome. Even their inscriptions meant more than numbers. They announced to locals, Rome was here. Order and rule had been laid, stone by stone. Travellers traced imperial distances by these markers, learning to count their world in Roman terms. Many resented that order, but it was impossible to ignore. A single mile of well-built road outshone any shrine or statue as a mark of imperial ambition. Gaius once saw graffiti on a milestone halfway to Brundisium. Here begins civilization. Scholars have since debated whether this was meant in irony or triumph. For those forced from their ancestral fields, it was both. Yet the roads endured, etching not only a means of travel, but a new cultural map. Roman ambition set in stone where all might see and all, in time, must walk. As decades passed into centuries, Gaius noticed the changes along the routes he once knew by heart. The old Appian way, once swept clear each month by city slaves under the watch of stern magistrates, now sprouted tufts of grass between worn stones. Way stations stood empty in some stretches. The imperial relay that once churned with hoofbeats and urgent couriers fell silent. By the reign of Valentinian III, a letter from a merchant at Beneventum complains, "The road is broken for 2 days' journey. No wheel dares it. The customs men have gone." His words, preserved on a battered ostracon, hinted at a larger unravelling. In some provinces, armies tasked with repairs instead pressed local farmers for bribes or timber, filling the gaps with earth instead of stone. Yet the skeleton of the system persisted, ghostly but defiant. Even after imperial authority frayed and city walls sprouted battlements, the roads shaped how the new mosaics of warlords, bishops, and petty kings moved troops or grain. Gaius's grandchildren could not recall who built the causeway outside Arles, yet its course still guided their carts to the market. Not all was decay. In the east, Justinian's reign brought a short-lived revival, with squads of engineers dispatched from Constantinople to patch the arteries leading to Antioch and Alexandria. But the old perfection never quite returned. Paths that once ferried legions now saw pilgrims, smugglers, and wandering monks. What lingered was the logic of the grid, a Roman logic, entwined in the bones of every town and border. Over centuries, Roman roads seeded the blueprints of medieval kingdoms and city-states. Their memory carved the first lines on every map that followed. The stones outlived the empire whose standard once shadowed them. From the morning shadows on the Via Flaminia near Rome to the sun-baked slabs leading into dusty Leptis Magna, Gaius's lifetime traced a web that spanned more than earth and stone. Each road was different, some as straight as a thrown spear, hurled across open plains. Others hugged the spines of mountains, stepping carefully with bridges and arches. Together they made a network, unbroken but layered, each route echoing its original purpose. Along those routes, the power of engineering was never just theory or marble models in an architect's study. It was grit and water pulled from far-off quarries, surveying rods levelled by the eye, compaction and drainage in every layer. Milestones marked not only the road, but the discipline that built it, each span a compromise between terrain and Roman will. Memories flashed, nights spent at a mutatio, waiting for a change of horses as imperial news thundered by. A merchant's laughter as he predicted which towns would rise or fall depending on a fork in the road. Farmers wishing for their own crops the speed the legions commanded. Gaius saw soldiers, magistrates, tacksmen, pilgrims, and entertainers moving by rhythms older than their cause, all linked by a pattern engraved deep into the land. Now, drawn together, the system's genius revealed itself. Roads for armies became roads for news, for trade, for the slow drift of peoples and the spark of new towns. The bones of movement, surveyed, measured, layered, bound a world even as empires shifted. Even now, centuries later, the old grid persists beneath modern highways. The road carried more than people. It carried Rome itself. Daylight slid across familiar fields, but in Gaius's mind, lines shimmered where no hedges or highways marked the modern ground. There, beneath the hum of contemporary traffic, he saw the ancient skeleton, the Via Appia, its gravelled crown holding fast south of Rome. The Via Egnatia, ghosting across Macedon, its path echoed in asphalt and railway alike. Modern towns pulsed where Roman staging posts once stood. On maps, these ancestral arteries showed up faint and stubborn, some doubled by autobahns, others lost beneath plough and suburb. Yet when the sun caught the stones, and an old milestone leaned out of the grass, Gaius recognized continuity more than loss. He thought of what persisted, the compulsive straightness of a Roman approach, city to city strung like beads, as if the world's best answer to geography was always a measured challenge. Even highways built millennia later traced Roman intent, favoring firm ground, bridging rivers at familiar crossings, refusing detour when the land could be bent. At engineering schools, young planners still puzzled over the Roman knack for gradients, the discipline of a cambered crown, the subtler gift for shaping a network that outlived the moment's emperors. Here, the past was less a ruin and more a framework. Gaius lingered on a simple thought, one he shared with every engineer who ever drove a stake into alien Earth. What we build maps, the future as well as the now. Roads that last do more than connect. They create echoes, dictate trade's direction, gather new lives to old stones. Rome's network was not just a memory. It was the argument that empire could shape the land, and, in doing so, cast a path far beyond its years.